The clink of fine glasses and murmurs of polite conversation filled the first-class cabin of Flight 427 to Geneva. Plush leather seats, designer handbags tucked overhead, and a menu boasting lobster bisque and Wagyu steak. It was the world of the elite. Keisha Rowland sat quietly in Seat 1A. She didn't shift, didn't fidget. She just existed, with the poise of someone who'd been here before, but never been fully welcomed. Her navy blue suit was tailored to perfection. Her heels had a quiet authority, and the way she sat, calm, still, unapologetically centered, made her presence impossible to ignore. But somehow, they still tried. A white flight attendant walked down the aisle. She paused briefly beside Seat 1A, barely making eye contact. "Excuse me," Keisha said with soft confidence. "I believe I had a pre-ordered meal on file, lobster bisque and Wagyu, booked 7 days in advance." The flight attendant blinked, smiled thinly. "Ah, right. Let me check." She walked off. No apology, no confirmation. Just a tone that said, "You sure about that?" Moments later, the same attendant returned holding a tray. It wasn't covered. There was no cloth napkin, no wine pairing, a cold sandwich wrapped in plastic, and a glass of water. "Sorry, we've run out of premium meals," she said, her voice light, her smile frozen. Keisha looked at the tray, then at the attendant. "I have an email confirmation. Stratus sent me 2 reminders." The attendant shrugged. "Sometimes the system just messes up. Happens all the time." She placed the tray down. No name, no apology. And just like that, she moved on, turning her attention to the white passenger 2 seats down. "Mr. Radcliffe, your steak is medium rare as requested, and here's your Chateau Margaux." Keisha didn't blink. She just listened. Behind her, the white men were already sipping wine and discussing crypto trends. One chuckled. "First class never disappoints." She picked up the plastic-wrapped sandwich, studied it for a second, then set it down. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Glasses clinked. A laugh echoed from seat 2C. Keisha sat in silence. The only black passenger in first class. The only one holding a tray that didn't belong here. Not because she wanted special treatment, but because she had ordered it, confirmed it, and earned it. She looked straight ahead. The ambient music playing softly above her wasn't enough to cover the silence now surrounding her. It was the kind of silence that doesn't scream, it stares. Everyone else was being served by name. She was just "ma'am." The woman beside her got offered a refill. No one asked Keisha if she needed anything. The attendant passed her again without a glance, still smiling, still calling white passengers Mr. Malcolm, Mr. Clayton, Dr. Redgrave. Keisha was invisible, but she didn't flinch. She didn't demand. She didn't correct anyone. She just adjusted the sleeve of her blazer, picked up the glass of water, and took a single sip. Then placed it back down with perfect control. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That will be enough." The attendant didn't respond, and Keisha didn't expect her to. Because this wasn't about a meal. It never was. It was about being looked at, and still unseen. It was about being called "ma'am" when everyone else was "sir." It was about a cold sandwich on a silver tray, served to the only person in the cabin who didn't fit the image they were used to. She could feel it. The indifference. The fake smiles. The selective kindness. But she didn't reach for her phone. She didn't complain. She didn't raise her voice. She just watched, And in that quiet, sharp stillness, something began to shift. Not around her, inside her. And nobody on board knew. The woman in seat 1A was the last person they should have underestimated. The sun poured through the high-rise glass walls of Roland Tech's Manhattan office, casting long shadows over the polished marble floor. Inside, the silence was different. Not cold, not dismissive, but powerful, controlled, earned. Keisha Rowland walked past her assistant, who stood with a tablet in hand, eyes sharp. Conference in Geneva confirmed. They've prepped the launch for the AI data integration protocol. Keisha nodded once. No words wasted. Everyone knew her rhythm. Efficient, focused, deliberate. Behind her were two framed photographs. One was of her mother, a public school principal in New Orleans. The other, a Forbes cover titled Keisha Rowland, Cybersecurity's Quiet Queen. She never liked the word queen. Not because it wasn't true, but because people only used it when they didn't understand the grind behind it. 15 years of building. From coding in basements to standing beside senators discussing national infrastructure threats. Her presence wasn't decoration, it was demand. On the 42nd floor of her tech tower, no one called her ma'am. No one forgot her name. No one offered her a cold sandwich. But Keisha didn't flaunt it. She never needed to. Power had always been silent in her hands. That was her edge. She had grown up understanding two things: how systems work and how they ignore people who look like her, especially when those people sit at the top. The flight to Geneva was supposed to be simple: close a multi-million-dollar international merger, speak on AI ethics in front of world leaders, and return home. But systems don't forget what they're built to do. And even when dressed in elegance, racism shows up wearing a uniform and a polite grin. That morning, before boarding, Keisha had skipped the VIP lounge. She didn't need soft jazz and champagne to remind her who she was. She chose to sit alone by the terminal window instead, watching ground crews load the aircraft. In her hand was a file, the final draft of the Roland-Lexon merger, a deal that would expand her cybersecurity footprint across Europe, challenge outdated data monopolies, and, more importantly, show what Black excellence looked like without apology. She had built this moment piece by piece, but racism didn't care about resumes. It didn't care about degrees or accolades. It lived in the shrug of a shoulder, the wrong name, the missing steak, and it had followed her onto that plane like it always did. Quiet, smooth, polished, and loaded with assumptions. As she stepped into the cabin earlier that day, the first-class attendant had looked past her. Just for a moment. But it was always in that moment. The second when her presence was logged as anomaly. When her designer bag and premium booking weren't enough to cancel out the color of her skin. Keisha had noticed it before. Not once. Every time. Every panel. Every contract meeting. Every business-class flight where she was offered wine after the white men finished theirs. She had learned to absorb it, not because she wanted to, but because if she didn't, the system would write her down as angry. Now, seated in 1A, staring at the untouched tray before her, the air around her didn't feel like altitude. It felt like memory. All those moments, all those cold sandwiches life had tried to serve her, wrapped in polite tone and fake smiles. She had accepted none of them. And she wasn't going to start now. Across the aisle, another man laughed with the crew. Champagne sparkled in his flute. His meal had arrived before takeoff. Keisha didn't look. She didn't have to. She already knew what this was. But what no one in that cabin knew, this flight wasn't just carrying her to Geneva. It was carrying them toward a reckoning. 1 mile at a time. The second time it happened, Keisha didn't flinch. A new flight attendant, this one a young white man with slicked hair and a polished smile, walked down the aisle holding a bottle of aged French wine. He poured glasses for the 3 white men seated across from her. "Mr. Malcolm, would you like a refill?" "Mr. Radcliffe, more bread for your foie gras?" Keisha's glass sat untouched, empty. He passed her row without a word. No name, no offer, not even a glance. Keisha tilted her head slightly and looked out the window. Below, clouds stretched like silent rivers. Above, a ceiling of soft lights and pretense. It was happening again. She pressed a button on her armrest. After a few moments, the same female attendant, Emily, according to her badge, returned. "Yes?" "I'd like to confirm," Keisha said. "You've fully run out of every premium entree?" Emily smiled without warmth. "Unfortunately, yes. There was a last-minute inventory adjustment." "And all the other passengers?" "They were prioritized based on status and order time. I ordered mine 7 days ago." "That may not have been reflected in the system." She gave a tight smile. "It happens." "Does it?" Emily blinked. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Is there anything else I can get you?" Keisha didn't respond right away. Then she nodded. "A name." "Excuse me?" "Yours. I'd like to know who served me tonight." There was a pause, then a flicker of something behind the flight attendant's eyes. Discomfort, confusion, maybe fear. "Emily Grant." Keisha nodded again. "Thank you." Emily walked away faster than she had arrived. The air in the cabin seemed to tighten. Keisha's fingers tapped softly on the tray table. Not angry, not frustrated, just steady, deliberate. She reached down to her handbag and slid out her tablet. One tap, fingerprint ID, secured access. She opened a private application labeled Line, a cybersecurity audit suite designed for real-time analysis, voice pickup, and personnel tracking. Not public software. This was Roland Tech's proprietary tool, built for defense contractors, governments, and multi-billion-dollar compliance systems. Keisha didn't build just for the market. She built for moments like this. The screen lit up. She tapped through the airline database API, cross-referencing staff assigned to Flight 427. Emily Grant, Senior Cabin Crew, Employee ID 9041-ST. Notes: 2 prior informal complaints. 1 flagged behavior note. Passenger reported being dismissed mid-service. Internal rating: neutral/watch. It was all there, and none of it had been addressed. She tapped once more and opened a secure channel. To Tia A. Grant. Subject: Cabin Audit Request. Urgent Attach. Flight ID 427. Crew Report. Grant. Emily Keywords. Discrimination Patterns. Service Prioritization. Audio Review. Tia, her most trusted executive assistant, would know what to do. They had run drills for this. Not just PR nightmares. Structural bias audits. Keisha didn't need to raise her voice. She just needed the system to speak back. Across the aisle, laughter continued. Wine glasses clinked. One of the men was telling a story about a startup acquisition in Miami. Another leaned back, waving a hand for more dessert. Keisha didn't look. She already knew how it ended. She had lived it before. At 26, it was the investor who told her, "You're a great speaker, Have you considered marketing instead of coding? At 29, it was the man who called her honey during a federal contract negotiation. At 33, it was the London conference where she sat on stage, only to be asked if she was invited as a guest of one of the panelists. And now, at 39, it was Emily with her plastic sandwich and polite disregard. The packaging changed. The intent didn't. Keisha looked at the tray again. 2 slices of bread, processed chicken, a wilted piece of lettuce, and not a single piece of dignity. She took a photo, not to post online, not for public outrage, just for evidence, just for memory. She turned the tablet slightly, capturing the cabin behind her in frame. Not a word, just data. Emily was now serving dessert to Mr. Radcliffe. Chocolate mousse garnished with gold flakes. The camera timestamp ticked. 003809. She logged it, marked it, tagged it. Then she turned off the screen, folded her arms, and leaned back. She wasn't going to be humiliated. She was going to make sure this never happened again. And by the time this plane touched down, she'd ensure no one wearing a smile that hid discrimination would get away with calling her ma'am like it meant something. Tia Grant didn't need an explanation. She was already at her desk, sleeves rolled up, multiple screens lighting up in front of her as the encrypted audit request came through. Subject line: Flight 427. Cabin Behavior Review. Priority: Red Level Watch. Her eyes scanned the data in seconds. Emily Grant, senior crew member, past incidents, unresolved complaints. Tia didn't need to guess. She already knew the pattern. She opened the Roland Tech interface, a backdoor built for moments exactly like this. Not for sabotage, not for revenge, for accountability. With a few keystrokes, she began to pull behavioral interaction logs from Stratus Air's integrated feedback systems, a luxury airline feature that tracked passenger experience metrics like name usage, response delays, and service balance, all accessible to premium partners. And Keisha Rowland was no ordinary flyer. Tia's screen filled with data, timestamps, names called, food items served, delay gaps, tray check times, smile recognition tracking from in-cabin sensors. And right there, it was clear. Keisha Rowland, name used, 0 times Mr. Radcliffe, name used, 6 times Mr. Malcolm, name used, 4 times meal priority delay, 22 minutes average delay for others, 2.4 minutes. Tia didn't shake her head. She didn't need to. She'd seen this too many times. Not loud racism, not slurs, just subtle exclusion in a luxury wrapper. She flagged the report, encrypted the file, and activated an internal protocol that Roland Tech only used in select emergencies. Level 5. Bias Alert. Executive Victim Triggered Flight 427. Cabin Review Auto Audit Data Transfer to Legal, PR, and Partner Oversight Units. Back on the plane, Keisha sat still. Outside her window, the clouds had thinned. Land was visible far below. Switzerland's edges were approaching. The plane had 4 hours left in the air. But the fallout had already begun. She opened her smartwatch. One message glowed on the screen. Tia Grant. Initial audit confirmed. Crew member pattern identified. Internal flagged. No anger, no smile. Just confirmation. Keisha turned the screen off and looked up. Emily was now pouring a vintage wine into Mr. Clayton's glass. She bent low, said something charming, placed a dessert spoon with gentle precision. Then she turned. Their eyes met. For a brief second, there was no noise, No tray, no orders, no conversation. Just two women, one holding on to power built on comfort, the other holding power built through war. Emily turned away first. Keisha didn't move. She tapped her armrest again. When the male attendant returned, she looked directly at him. "Please let Ms. Grant know I won't require further service during this flight." He hesitated. "Of course, ma'am." That word again. Keisha just looked at him until he nodded awkwardly and stepped away. Then she opened a secure app. This one wasn't for Tia. It was connected directly to a protocol rarely used, one Roland Tech had developed in collaboration with global ethics boards and a few high-profile luxury brands. Code: White Echo. It was used for when systemic culture failures occurred. Not single incidents, but patterns. She typed 6 words. Begin partner-level protocol. Flight 427. The screen blinked once, then opened a form. She didn't need to type more. Her profile was already logged. Roland Tech wasn't just a partner to Stratus Air. They were one of the firms auditing its global digital compliance architecture. Keisha had approved it herself. 6 months ago, she'd warned their execs about unconscious bias risks. They said they'd handle it. They hadn't. And now, they were about to feel it. She submitted the protocol with a tap. Back in Geneva, 2 notifications appeared in the inbox of the airline's legal affairs team. Subject: Roland Compliance Alert. 427. Attached: Beginning of behavioral footage from in-flight service. Auto-analyzed. Name usage index, disparity. Service delay ratio, flagged. Tone, bias, detected. Repeat pattern, present. There was no rage, no press, no outburst, just cold data. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and tears down entire walls. Keisha folded her tablet closed and placed it on the armrest. Then she leaned back into the leather seat, resting her hands in her lap. 3 hours of silence remained before landing. But by the time this plane touched ground, the crew would no longer be walking off the same way they boarded. Tia Grant leaned closer to her screen. The data was ugly. Service disparity. Tone index gaps. Response priority coded by skin tone patterns. The facial interaction metrics told the whole story. Keisha had been spoken to the least, served last, and her name was never used. The white passengers were addressed like old friends. Tia exported the first data packet and attached it to a compliance dashboard built inside Roland Tech's anti-discrimination framework, a tool they had offered Stratus Air months ago. They never activated it. Now, they wouldn't have a choice. Tia triggered an encrypted dispatch to Stratus Air, Corporate Ethics Division, from Roland Tech. Partner Oversight. Subject: Level 3 Escalation. Discrimination Review. Flight 427. Attached were the full analytics, voice cue logs, time-stamped screenshots from the cabin's onboard surveillance feed, and a service delay heat map. It wasn't opinion, it was evidence. Patterns don't lie. Across the globe, in Geneva, a red alert flashed in the inbox of Charles Edmonds, CEO of Stratus Air Europe. He had seen this subject line before, but never with a Roland signature on it. Edmonds opened the report. Page after page of cold statistical confirmation. A breakdown showing not just Emily Grant's behavior, but the flight system's failure to flag it earlier. Internal procedures ignored. Repeated low service markers dismissed. Behavioral alerts muted. There were even 2 older complaints buried deep in HR archives, both from black passengers. Neither investigated. This time, there would be no dismissal, no soft apology. The system had been told. It had chosen silence. And now it was exposed. Back on the flight, Keisha's smartwatch pulsed once. Tia. Legal team notified. CEO inbox reached. Review protocol acknowledged. Keisha tapped once. Acknowledged. She didn't look around the cabin. She didn't need to see the smiles anymore. She knew what was coming. She watched as Emily returned to serve petit fours and wine refills to the white businessmen. Her posture was perfect, her charm selective. She laughed louder now, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Emily just didn't know it yet. Keisha checked her screen again. The internal system log now showed the protocol had been forwarded to Stratus Air's legal, PR, ethics, and global operations teams. Every executive level had eyes on it. Every detail of Emily's conduct, her dismissive tone, her refusal to use Keisha's name, all of it had been logged and dissected by AI. Even the moment she shrugged and handed over the sandwich. Captured, time-stamped, compared, now visible. Not just to Keisha, to the entire board. Keisha folded her arms. Her eyes didn't blink. She watched the clouds shift outside the window. The most powerful part of her presence wasn't her silence. It was the fact that the system was now speaking for her, and it was louder than any scream. Stratus Air's Emergency Ethics Committee was already in motion. A team was being assembled to meet Flight 427 upon landing. Geneva Legal Affairs had been instructed to initiate a face-to-face crew inquiry. HR protocols updated. PR containment documents drafted. Keisha would not be walking off that plane into baggage claim. She'd be walking into a boardroom-level response. Meanwhile, Emily continued her route, unaware. She bent down to adjust a blanket for Mr. Malcolm, called him by name, laughed again. Keisha watched her carefully. This wasn't just about Emily. It was about every Emily the system had protected before. The polite ones, the smiling ones, the ones who knew just how far they could go without being recorded. Until now. Tia's second report had already landed. It contained a 2-year history of Emily's in-flight conduct. Notes from past passengers. 2 internal emails. One quote stood out. Focus more on guests who appreciate service. Prioritize those who tip. No direct racism, just coded language. Bias with a soft edge. Prejudice in uniform. Now weaponized against the system that refused to act. Keisha didn't blink as her tablet buzzed one more time. Tia, CEO Charles Edmonds, acknowledged receipt. Full board copied. Landing team confirmed. It was done. And yet, no one in the cabin knew. They still laughed, still poured champagne, still looked through her like she didn't belong. She let them. Because when the wheels touched down, the conversation would shift. No more pretending, no more smiles that hid disrespect. The system had been given a chance to protect its own. Now it would be forced to face the woman it tried to erase. The tires screeched softly against the runway as Flight 427 touched down in Geneva. Inside the cabin, there was a calm buzz. Passengers stretched, checked their watches, casually reached for jackets. Champagne glasses were half empty. Dessert trays cleared. Keisha Rowland didn't move. Her belt was still fastened. Her arms rested on her lap, her face unreadable. The captain's voice came on overhead. Welcome to Geneva. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. A few heads turned toward the front. They noticed two unfamiliar faces standing just beyond the cabin door. A tall black man in a dark gray suit, sharp, composed, holding a folder with the Stratus Air logo. Next to him, a woman in a navy blazer with a small pin on her collar. Legal Affairs Division. They weren't greeting VIPs. They were waiting for the flight crew. In seat 1A, Keisha calmly unclipped her belt. She stood, straightened her blazer, picked up her leather bag, and adjusted the strap on her shoulder with the same grace she boarded with. One of the flight attendants turned as she walked up the aisle. Not Emily. This one was younger. Nervous. "Miss Rowland," he whispered, "there's a welcome team waiting." Keisha didn't stop. "They're not here for me," she replied without pausing. The younger attendant blinked. Her tone hadn't changed. Her words weren't loud, but something about the way she said it, the calm, the precision, made him understand immediately. At the front, the two officials didn't speak. They simply nodded as she passed. One of them began walking behind her slowly. Keisha walked into the terminal without a single backward glance, and behind her, the crew of Flight 427 began filing out. Emily was the last to appear, her smile still in place, her stride confident, until she saw the three people standing between her and the exit gate. One held a tablet. Another carried a sealed envelope. The man with the tablet stepped forward, eyes steady. "Flight Crew 427, you're required to report to Emergency Meeting Room C for immediate evaluation." Emily's expression flickered. "I'm sorry, is this about—" "This is a formal investigation procedure under Ethics Protocol 9.3. Passengers from the cabin were now moving around them. A few glanced over, but kept walking. But the crew? Frozen. Daniel, the male attendant, looked pale. His hand tightened around his service bag. Emily opened her mouth again, but this time no sound came out. Her colleagues didn't look at her. No one spoke. They had all felt it on that plane. The shift. Now, the aftermath. As they were led down the side corridor toward the restricted meeting rooms, the mood changed entirely. No more white gloves. No more trained smiles. Just silence. At the back of the hallway, Keisha stepped into a private car already waiting. Black windows, discreet driver. No questions. She didn't speak. Her smartwatch buzzed once. TIA. Suspension procedures triggered. Full review underway. Internal HR in session. She nodded slightly. Not in satisfaction. Not even relief. Just confirmation. Across the tarmac, inside the meeting room, Emily sat at a long table under bright lights. A camera pointed at her. Two HR investigators on one side. A silent legal representative on the other. On the screen in front of her, the video clip. Her saying, "We're out of meals," then shrugging, then walking away. The investigators didn't raise their voices. Explain why passenger Rowland, the only black first-class traveler, received no name service and was offered economy food despite a confirmed order placed 1 week prior. Emily swallowed. I didn't know. Maybe the system. We reviewed the system logs. Her booking was confirmed. The service plan was finalized. Your response was not aligned with protocol. Emily's voice cracked. I didn't mean to. That doesn't change what you did. Outside, the day continued like nothing had happened. Flights landed. Suitcases rolled. Taxis waited. But for Emily Grant, and every silent ma'am she had used to erase dignity, the silence had ended. The system was no longer looking away, and the woman she thought she could dismiss had walked off the plane first, not as a victim, as the storm that followed her. The lake outside Keisha's Geneva hotel window was still, glass-like, quiet. Inside, the room was empty, except for a small desk, a steaming mug of tea, and an open laptop. The headline on the screen read, "Airline crew suspended after silent racism exposed by black CEO, Washington Post." Another tab was open to Forbes. Keisha Rowland appointed ethics advisor to Stratus Air's Luxury Service Reform Board. She scrolled without emotion. None of it surprised her. What happened on that flight wasn't an anomaly. It was the quiet structure the world had always accepted, until someone forced it to speak. Her assistant, Tia, had already wrapped up the final compliance summary. Stratus Air had launched a mandatory retraining program for all first-class crew. New digital behavior monitoring was being tested, powered by Rowland Tech's systems. And for the first time in the airline's history, they had invited an outside voice to lead their internal reform. Keisha's. Not because they wanted a black woman to tell them what was wrong, but because now they had no choice but to listen. She closed the laptop gently. A knock at the door broke the silence. It was a young staffer from the conference committee. She carried a printed note. "Miss Rowland," she said softly, handing it over. "From one of the panel moderators, he asked if you'd be willing to speak tomorrow. They said, your presence yesterday has already changed the tone of the entire forum." Keisha didn't answer right away. She read the note, then folded it carefully and placed it on the table. "Tell them I'm not here to speak," she said. "I'm here to show them what can't be ignored anymore." The girl nodded, her eyes wide. Then she left. Keisha turned back to the window. Down below, in the lobby, cameras were waiting. Not paparazzi, not reporters. 3 young black women stood there, early 20s, nervous. One wore a lanyard that read, "Tech Futures Intern." They weren't here for pictures. They were here because they had heard what happened on that flight. They had watched the clip of Emily walking away. They had seen the line that changed everything. "Thank you. That will be enough." It had gone viral without sound effects, without hashtags, without edits. It was real, and that's why it shook the system. Keisha picked up her coat and walked to the elevator. She didn't need a podium. She just needed the system to remember. Every time someone like Emily smiled with disrespect, there could be someone like her in seat 1A. Downstairs, when she entered the lobby, the 3 women stood taller. One stepped forward. "Miss Rowland, can I just say thank you?" Keisha looked her in the eye. "Don't thank me. Just don't let them ever forget your name." Later that evening, back at Stratus Air's headquarters, a quiet meeting was held. No media, just senior staff, lawyers, HR, and culture directors. A printed quote from Keisha was on the table. "Luxury is not about food or wine. It's about being seen as fully human, regardless of what seat you paid for." No one argued. The same data that had once been buried in complaints was now part of a restructuring protocol. Employee Emily Grant was suspended indefinitely. Her crew record was added to a federal non-compliance register. 2 other crew members, silent bystanders, were placed under review. The system had moved, finally. 3 days later, Keisha boarded another flight. Different route, different staff, same airline. The attendant greeted her at the door. "Welcome back, Miss Rowland. We've been expecting you." No tray mix-up, no cold sandwich, no empty water. In seat 1A, there was a small brass plate mounted just above the armrest. Engraved were 3 words: "We remember you." She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She sat down, fastened her belt, and looked ahead. Outside, the sky was wide, endless, and finally beginning to stretch for people like her.